Welcome to the Crit House, everybody. I'm Jeff Larson. Today, we're looking at the work of Teresa Camozzi. Teresa is a California multimedia artist. She was born in Morocco and has been in the United States since she was 5 years old. Her artwork evokes the complexity of Islam, while her immigration shades her political view. She's known internationally for large-scale permanent public artworks. She combines representational and abstract images using photography, drawing, and computer manipulation. In 2009, she earned the National Americans for the Arts Award for a project in Plano, Texas. And today, we look at her book of work from the pandemic, Suspension. The Suspension photo series rose from the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. The photo series was created at the start and continues through the stages of the pandemic's life. Today for reviewers, we have Erin Carey once again. Erin is a curator, an artist, and an educator. She has a BA from Sarah Lawrence College and an M.F.A. from Tufts University. Erin was the academic and gallery director at NESOP, curating more than 100 exhibits. Erin's photographic work explores the nuances of the American landscape and its vernacular. She has an ongoing project called A Spring That Love Remembered. Erin works at the M.F.A. program at Tufts University. She also works as a preparator, art handler at the Addison Gallery, and she is on the board of the Griffin Museum of Photography. And we also have Ellen Friedlander with us once again. She is a Los Angeles artist. She first found her passion for photography when she was 16, and she took to the street while at Ithaca College. She worked for several decades for commercial photographers before setting off on her own. And after raising her family in Hong Kong, she moved to Los Angeles in 2018. She is now a co-director with Pasadena Photography Arts, where she curates and hosts the Open Show. Her book is called Extended Frame.
I'm a fine artist. I'm a painter and sculptor, and picked up photography about the 1980s. Have been using that either to paint from or to collage with. The most recent years, I've been taking photography much more seriously and letting the fine art go a bit. The pandemic book happened certainly during the pandemic, and I was really alone and I was also in grief. My mother had passed, and these images just started to come to me. Revelations from the Other Side kind of says it all. These are sort of mysterious, anchored in the clairvoyant to a certain degree.
So Teresa, what is it? What you've done this book draft, and this is a work in progress. It's not a published book. What kind of input are you looking for from Erin and from Ellen about what we're seeing, and how can they help you sort of in your thought process to try to get to where you want to go?
I'd like to speak about individual pictures because sequentially I don't think I have it tight enough. I perhaps need some images in between. I want to make a book that is defining emotions through the pandemic.
Erin, let's start with you as
Sure.
the educator in the crowd. And I know you haven't had a lot of time to live with the book draft and the images, but what's your initial reaction? What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think before I jump into like really constructive conversational things, I want to just like give you my overall impression. So I like to usually just define what we're looking at.
That's perfect.
So one of the things I noticed, so I would just describe this as it's deeply personal, right? So this is a deeply personal project, which is rooted in a personal experience, but then a shared historical experience also. So it has that sort of microcosm, macrocosm thing that's happening. And I think like ultimately when I stood back and looked at the whole thing, I could see that the project is about control, or a lack of control, that the artist is addressing something beyond their control, things we can't touch, things that we can no longer hold, things which are ephemeral or disappears. This idea of disappearance is really important. So more than anything, they remind me of memories or dreams. And I think like in you talking about the loss of your mother, and also about this idea of isolation and alienation and lack of understanding what's happening as the pandemic is blossoming, like 3 years ago. These are mercurial events, which are now in our memories and in your memories, and they're really vivid. So I feel like that was the impression I was left with, is that they're experiential more than anything else. I think the idea of bringing it to a book format might offer you closure, right? Or putting sort of some kind of punctuation on the end of the experience. And in that regard, I totally understand. I'm super interested in text and image, or the relationship of words and imagery and how they work together and sometimes against each other, and how that might work here. So I thought like maybe I'll hold that for later, but I have thoughts about the way you've sort of formatted it and the language that's being used, and when an image is stronger than the text, or when the text in a way pulls away from images. And I think these are some considerations when we talk about a book format. But I think it's deeply personal and it's moving.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ellen, what's your overall thought? Let you dive in.
Well, I was excited about the imagery of using photography in less than traditional ways. I find that extremely exciting, and I think you did that in a really beautiful way. I was a little curious about some of the order of how you approach the book. And I think that we could probably talk about that a little further, because I think like there's a lot of different imagery in this book.
Yeah.
And perhaps some of it belongs in the book and maybe some of it doesn't belong in the book, that would really accentuate what you're trying to convey here. That's my overall, but it's beautiful work.
So Teresa, is that initial sort of thought, does that resonate with you? Is it sort of accurate for?
It definitely does. One of the issues I had was wanting it to be sequential in the way that I created it. And then later I realized I really didn't have to do that. These back pages are about installation and so forth, and that could or could not be in there. I don't really care. But previous to this installation aspect, I really liked that space that you have between the photograph and the primary photograph and the small photograph to the left, because as the eye can see, you almost can't see the far left. So you have a really big format on the right to look at the work. Did I answer that question?
You did. Erin, so you said you had some more detailed thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I think similarly to Ellen, there were certainly moments for me where I felt like some of the images perhaps don't need to be in the book, or I'm curious about like what work we think that they're doing and what ultimately what they're serving. So I really wanted to focus on, can I start with like the strongest images or things that were the most compelling that really held
You
my
absolutely
attention?
may.
Awesome.
Sure.
So I think probably page 9 for me was one of the strongest images in there, which is the panorama of the body being ascended, covered in shroud. So one of the things I noticed in general, right, is that you are absolutely utilizing references to religious iconography. So there's the use of the body, the shape of those bodies, the shrouding set into a landscape, and that like sort of reoccurs throughout almost all of the imagery, even when there's not a body. The way that you treated the bits of paper in terms like they have a presence that is bodily, if you will. Even the iconography of the animals and what they represent in terms of spirituality, I thought overall I see that there's this really calm, it draws us into something larger than it's philosophical, it's ritualistic, it's bigger and out there. I really loved this picture, and I think part of it for me is that I looked at science and religion as having like a conversation around an event, like two different languages are being used to describe an event which neither one can fully describe. So I was absolutely compelled by these interesting, strange boxes and cutouts in the sky, which are like pixelated, they're not pixelated sections, but they're sort of these nice Hockney-like collages, if you will.
Yeah.
So we see this body ascending and we see this like darkened area. And it's surreal, it's beautiful, it's also really horrifying, right? In a way that is sort of like the end of time or the end of the world. And neither one of those things fully defines it. So I'm compelled by this. I'm like, I'm really shaken by the idea of the thing and the way it's described. I think the panorama works really well too. In general, beyond the book, I had questions about looking at the way that you utilized the subject in the landscape often. I'm interested in scale as an artist, as a landscape artist. And I'm curious about a book and how a book functions. And I'm thinking about how these might have a really strong appeal as like wall-sized images, projections. So I'm curious about what happens when we diminish the scale and then put it into something that's very flat, two-dimensional, that sits in the lap. So these were just things I was thinking about in terms of like the way that you're using imagery and then how the book does or doesn't serve them. But in terms of imagery, this one was at the top of my list. I also was really compelled by, much later on, here, I'm just gonna pull up my note. Yes, oh my gosh. So this idea of like the apparition appearing from darkness, this sort of almost chiaroscuro. So again, like you're utilizing techniques from religious painting that are interesting. Again, the thing isn't totally defined, it's spooky, it's haunting. So when I think about the experience of death or loss or the pandemic, those two things line up, right? And for me, these were much less literal than some of the other images.
Ellen, let's have you put your 2 cents in on some of the images as well.
Well, I totally agree with the comments that Erin is bringing forth. And I think it kind of, when I went through your work, Teresa, and I was riveted by the paper sculptures, I think it is. I really loved those. But then when I went into these quite much more detailed, much more layered work, I was a little like, this is just gorgeous. The light, it makes me feel almost like a jail cell, which is reminiscent of feeling COVID, of, lots of memorabilia that floats from my brain from that time. But it made me a little confused about some of the paper images intertwined with these amazing images in the book. I think it might be that you're trying to do too much in here. That if you kind of pared it down and maybe the small imagery is kind of those, on the left-hand side as a balance or something, that's something to explore. So I was taken by these, but then when we went into much more of the photographs that are much more layered and have a lot more complexity to them, that are much more photographic in nature, I got a little confused on how everything tied together.
I can understand that. Thank you.
Yes. I think kind of piggybacking on top of what Ellen's saying, hopefully in a way that's constructive, is that you also went through the effort of making the paper. So part of me wondered, like, is the photo simply a document at this moment? And the actual art is the experiential thing of having created the paper itself. Like, is the literal object, that lovely, delightful, regardless of its size, paper object, what you're attempting to record? Perhaps that is, in terms of us, like you processing one idea, perhaps that's a unique piece of art, right? That ends up coming out of the book because the photograph doesn't do it justice and has a different goal.
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
I agree. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I got some made out into sort of a Cornell-like boxes. And they're small, they're maybe 5 inches, but I haven't spent very much time on it. I'm glad that you spoke it up. Yeah.
And this photograph is beautiful. There's a different way that you could orient this book to make it incredibly powerful. And you probably need less, in my opinion, less divisions, and let the photograph and the work speak for itself, because it does.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree in that regard also. And I was curious about the gray. That might be something to look at. I struggle a little bit with the gray around all of the images. I'm not sure white might be the answer either, but I might look at it because somehow it's like you're attempting to, through the graphic format, like hold down things that are light and airy that want to lift up.
Okay.
So that was a question before, Teresa, before we got to recording here. You talked about looking to bring in a designer, somebody who has experience. That you designed this on your own, right? Is that designed
Indeed.
and did the writing, and so everything we see here was of your own
Wow.
process.
Well, it's beautiful. Can you go back one? Yes, here. Like these are exquisite. I'm not so sure it goes with some of the other photographs that we've looked at that are so much more layered. These strike me as a totally different book, even though it's from the same core and even though it's from the same emotional place. It's almost like you created two bodies of work through your experience, or three, which is great. You know, I don't think you have to put them together. What do you think, Erin?
I completely agree 100%. That was absolutely my feeling. I mean, I described these in my little notes as literal like photographic Rothkos. There's something really, they're beautiful, but they do completely different work. I would love to see them printed huge, like 30 by 40, and I think they would knock people's socks out and be beautiful art objects. But in terms of the book, I think I would go with the more Jerry Ullsman like layered images. I think that's really where the meat is.
Well, I think Teresa liked the reference to Rothko.
Very much.
Well, and your experience, Teresa, is with larger artwork, public artwork. I mean, so this is a little different for you to look into doing a book as opposed to some of the larger displays you've done around the world?
Oh, definitely. I've frankly never done a book. This is the first one. And my coach, who was helping me with my first portfolio review, looked at the images, these should be in a book. And I thought, oh, okay, I guess I got to do that because I'm really dumb. I don't know a lot of stuff around this. So I thought, yeah, I can do a book in 3 weeks. And this is the outcome. So that portfolio review was dead for a few people and very vivacious for others, but that's what I kind of expected would happen.
Well, that's an interesting question, Erin and Ellen. I mean, when you see these, do you see them as being something that belong in a book? Or, I mean, I think, Ellen, you referred to them as being, these should be on the wall, these should be big. And is that your thought?
I think half of these images belong in a book and half of these images belong, you know, big and art objects. You know, I think that there's two stories here, and then at the end you have a catalog, which actually is a trifold that doesn't even belong in the book, that can be separate, but you've now created your trifold, so you're ahead of the game. This is a beautiful photograph. I found this really compelling. The deer in the headlights, I feel like I'm in a hole. I felt like I was in there. I loved this photograph.
Ellen, can I ask you, what did you think about as we move through the book, the text, like the numbers with the titles and the sometimes a little poetic like description, and were those always working for you? Because I struggled with them a little bit. I'm going to be honest and say that there were moments where I just didn't want to see the word pandemic 7 times. I was like, and there were also some of those little poetic descriptions were an attempt to explain. And I was like, don't explain. Just the phrase beggar's bowl is compelling, and it makes me think of something, not just what you were talking about, but it references the outside world. So it's like, I wondered if we could sort of sometimes use a phrase or a word and not have to very like in a controlled way, like format it into something regimented. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't need that photograph on the left because I'm confused. They don't necessarily work together. The one on the left may in fact be beautiful, but in this page, it's distracting. Whereas the one on the right, I'm sucked in.
Okay.
Well, Teresa, it's one of the challenges of doing a book as opposed to the big artwork pieces that you have done in the past. It's, you know, you've now got to sort of think about how they interact with each other and sequence and all that as well.
Definitely.
I definitely see that.
As far, oh yes, these are lovely. Then this got a little bit so, I don't want to say literal, but just versus all the other imagery is so ethereal and, you know, soft and kind of transparent with essences of references to things that we know. And then this photograph, I was just shocking, you know, to my soul. And I'm not so sure that it brings that much to the table in this context.
I think that's really fair. I described it as on the nose. You know, sort of like, this is a thing that we expect to see when you say the word pandemic, right? Or science, or you start to reference those things with the text and image. And so like this one was not as thrilling, right? Or doesn't transport me to another place. And almost all the other images where you're layering and using this darkness and lightness and shrouding and birds and animalia, I mean, you totally transport me and I see your vision and it's not my vision. And then this is a thing I expected to see, maybe, if somebody said pandemic. So
Teresa, let me ask you this. Now we've been talking for a little bit about the work and you've gotten some thoughts. What is your reaction? Or like, do you have things that you think, no, you don't understand what I'm trying to do? Are there things that we should be thinking about that we haven't considered in the discussion?
Oh, you guys are overwhelmingly wonderful. I appreciate your candidness and appreciate what you're saying. And there were many times when I was putting this together that I thought, this is too weird. You're putting the previous image and then these birds. I just had to trust my intuition to just get it out there. But in reflection, I agree with really everything that you've said.
Well, you guys are so smart.
I mean, is this a diptych, or or these two could be separated?
They could be separated, yes. I like them together, but one seems so Teutonic and the other is moving that I'm not sure they really belong together now. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the one on the right, the bird, it can stand they can both stand so well on their own. Versus here, I'm distracted, and the writing on the left doesn't really serve the photographs. Less is more, in my opinion, as far as writing goes. I agree with Erin, and I think that and we don't need, people don't want to hear the word pandemic. Once would be enough.
Yes.
there is a certain exhaustion at this point with the hearing about it. True.
That's very true.
See, like this one, this was also in my top images. This was so moving. It was so arresting. There's also, I think we already looked at it, but there was another one of those in the second section, that apparition, like in the dark chambered room with the light through the window, had so much potential in that sort of like installation experiential way, where I felt like, oh, to actually be in a darkened space where I'm invited into this sort of like alternate reality of looking through the window and seeing a thing occur, you know, like in that way that Christian Boltanski, right? Like he uses images, but they're installed in spaces that we move through. And so in seeing them in different lights and different, you know, like with different movements and texture and sound, I'd be curious, you know, if I were walking through a city and I looked across and saw like down an alley across a wall, that apparition moving and dancing on your image, I mean, I would be totally thrilled and elated, like a portal had opened to another place. Because I think that's the work the image does, but I'm not sure the book really brings it to life that way, the way it might in another way.
Jeff, if you go back to where you were, where it was kind of like an egg, and then on the left-hand side, it was just, you were just there. It was this one. That left-hand side, that image on the left is just beautiful, and yet it gets lost on the left-hand side. And you have this very static, I get this image on the right that's equally beautiful as far as an art object, but doesn't have the same resonance as that unfamiliar, ethereal, bound human-ish form on the left. So I think just having that left side image on the right would be incredibly powerful.
Okay. You know, I have to say that's an interesting thought, because in going through this, I don't think until you started talking about that I paid that much attention to that image. And you're right, that is a powerful one.
And I think that just reorienting what you have in this book is what are the most powerful photographs not so much your art objects, which are definitely beautiful on its own, but you have a compelling book of really interesting photographs that you don't need a lot of words for, that people will feel what you felt.
There is definitely a feeling here. Erin, I'm going to let you have the last word on this discussion.
Cheers. So in regards to the book, I was thinking if you're really married to the idea of the book, which I think similarly to what Ellen is saying, there are some really strong images that together need to get edited down and are the book and the thing you're talking about. I might encourage you to think about a concertina as a style, a Japanese book, which does not have a traditional binding on either side, where the pages are actually, they're folded and bent so that as you move through it, you're opening and closing the pages. And so that each one, I keep thinking about, I adore books. I have a huge photo library of books, and there's something about the white plate, the gray space, this idea of turning the page left to right makes it seem literal and narrative. It implies a historical timeline. There's something about your images, which are ephemeral and they're experiential. And so I want to be enveloped in them. And so I'm just curious, and I want to encourage you to look at a concertina as an idea for the book.
Well, that's a great idea. Teresa, thank you so much for coming on the Crit House and showing your work. It's been, most of the work we have seen on the Crit House while we've been doing this is sort of straight photography, and to be able to talk about a different form of photography is it's great for me to learn and to see what you're thinking and to hear what folks think about it. I look forward to seeing what you come up with in the final project for this project. So thank you for showing your work. It's I'm always grateful that people are as courageous to show their work when it's in a development stage. So hopefully we've been helpful to you. Erin, thank you so much. And Ellen, thank you as well. For everybody out there who's watching, I want to encourage you, if you are interested in showing your work on the Crit House, you can do that at thecrithouse.com. There's a place to register there. And I will be linking out to a couple of videos of previous Crit Houses with both Erin and Ellen. So thank you all for watching the Crit House.